not the fact that Japanese is taught in a strange way, but the fact that English is taught in a strange way. The truth is that the Japanese non-past tense is very similar to the English non-past tense. What is the English non-past tense? Well, it is the plain dictionary form of English words. Eat, walk, etc. Why do I call it a non-past tense? Well, let's take an example. Suppose you get a message on your keitai saying, I walked to the cafe and now I eat cake and drink coffee. What would you know about the person who sent that message? Well, you'd know that it was not a native English speaker, wouldn't you? Because no native English speaker say it when we mean that we eat cake sometimes. I eat cake. I'm not one of those people who doesn't eat cake. I do eat cake. Whenever there's any cake around, I eat it. Well, that doesn't mean I'm eating cake right at this moment. When else do we use the English non-past plain form of verbs? Well, sometimes we use them for future events. Next week, I fly to Tokyo. Next month, I have an exam. And sometimes we use them for something that's going on right now, but not mostly. For example, in a literary description, the sun sinks over the sea and a small, happy robot runs across the beach. But that isn't the way we use it most of the time in everyday speech, is it? So the Japanese non-past tense is very similar in the way it functions to the English non-past tense. If you can understand one, you can pretty much understand the other. Most of the time, the Japanese non-past tense refers to future events. Inu ga taberu, the dog will eat. Sakura ga aruku, Sakura will walk. The way we've been using it up to now, Sakura walks, is possible, but it isn't the most natural way. We've been using it that way because it was the only tense we knew. If we want to say something more natural, like Sakura is walking, what do we do? Well, what do we do in English? In English we say, don't we? Sakura is walking. We use the word to be. You can be walking. Sakura is walking. We are walking. Fortunately, in Japanese we don't have all these different forms of the word to be. We use the same word every time, and the word is iru. Iru means be in relation to animals and people, and to make this continuous present tense, we always use iru. So, Sakura is walking, Sakura ga aruite iru. Dog is eating, inu ga tabete iru. Now let's notice that in a sentence like inu ga tabete iru, we have something we haven't yet seen, and that's a white engine. A white engine is an element that could be an engine, but in this case, it's not the engine of this sentence. It's modifying or telling us more about one of the core elements of the sentence. So, the core of this sentence is inu ga iru. The dog is. But the dog isn't just existing, the dog is doing something. And that white engine tells us what it is doing. It is eating. And we're going to see this white engine structure over and over again as we go deeper into Japanese. And just as in English, we don't say the dog is eat. We use a special form of the verb that goes along with the verb of being. So in English we say is walking, is eating. In Japanese we say tabete iru, aruite iru. Now, how do we form this te form, which is the form we use for making the continuous present? With a word like taberu, it's very easy indeed. All we have to do is take off the ru and put te in its place. The bad news is that with other verbs, we do have slightly different ways of attaching the te. Apart from the plain ru form, there are 4 other ways. The textbooks will say 5, but in fact 2 of them are so similar that we can treat them as 4. And I've made a video on exactly what these ways are. And I think it makes it much simpler than most explanations. So it's very important to watch that so that you can learn how to form the continuous present tense. The good news is it's perfectly regular. Once you know the ending of a verb, you also know how to put the te onto it. The only one that's a bit tricky is ending verbs. But the video will explain that. So how do we put things into the past tense? Fortunately, that's very easy indeed. All we do is add ta. That's the whole thing. So, inu ga taberu, dog will eat. Inu ga tabetta, dog ate. Now there are different ways of attaching ta to different kinds of verbs, verbs with different endings. But the good news here is that they are exactly the same as the ways that you attach te. So once you've learned the ways that te attaches, you've also learned the ways that ta attaches. So if you watch that te form video, you'll be able to do both the continuous present and the past. Now there's one more thing about time expressions that I think is useful to learn now. If we want to make it clear when we say watashi wa keiki o taberu, that we're talking about a future event, we can say ashita, which means tomorrow. Ashita keiki wo taberu. Tomorrow I will eat cake. And that's all we have to do. We just say tomorrow before we say the rest of the sentence, just as we do in English. Tomorrow I'm going to eat cake. Ashita keiki wo taberu. Now, tomorrow is what we call a relative time expression because it's relative to today. Today is yesterday's tomorrow. And with all relative time expressions like that, yesterday, last week, next year, and so forth, times that are relative to the present time, we just do what we did then. We put the time expression at the beginning of the sentence, and that puts the whole sentence into that time. However, when we have an absolute time expression, an expression which is not relative to the present, such as Tuesday or 6 o'clock, then we have to use ni. Tuesday is kayobi, and we may say kayobi ni keiki wo taberu. On Tuesday, I will eat cake. Now, the important thing here is that it can seem a bit complicated to have to work out, is a time absolute or relative? And the good thing to know here is that it's not complicated at all because it works exactly the same as English. In English, we say, tomorrow I eat cake. Next week, I have an exam, and so forth. But when we use an absolute time expression, we say, on Monday, I will eat cake. At 6 o'clock, I have an exam. If we're talking about a month, we say, in July, I'm going to Tokyo. Now, Japanese works in exactly the same way, except that we don't have to remember when we're using on, when we're using at, and when we're using in. In Japanese, we use ni every time. But in English, when we need one of those little words, on, in, or at, then we need ni in Japanese. And when we don't, then we don't need ni in Japanese. English and Japanese are identical in that respect. So rather than sitting down to work out is this relative or is this absolute, just think whether you need an on, in, or at in English, and if you do, you need ni in Japanese. And if you don't need ni in Japanese. It's really as simple as that. Now, in these 4 lessons so far, we've covered an awful lot of Japanese, and now we're able to do quite a few things. So I think we need some way of consolidating this work. Therefore, I've made some worksheets. So if you're learning Japanese for the first time, or if you want to refresh with some worksheets, I'm going to tell you how to get them in the information section below. So take a look there at the end of this video, and I'll give you all the details. Now, I'd like to thank my... Konnichiwa. Today, we're going to talk about Japanese verb groups. Japanese verbs fall into 3 groups, and these don't matter except when we're going to make some change in the form of the verb. But because we do that pretty often, it's important to understand the 3 groups. The first group of Japanese verbs is called ichidan verbs, or one-level verbs. Some people call them ru verbs, which is a very silly surname. If you're going to call them anything like that, we should probably konnichiwa. Today, we're going to talk about Japanese verb groups. Japanese verbs fall into 3 groups, and these don't matter except when we're going to make some change in the form of the verb. But because we do that pretty often, it's important to understand the 3 groups. The first group of Japanese verbs is called ichidan verbs, or one-level verbs. Some people call them ru verbs, which is a very silly name. If you're going to call them anything like that, we should probably call them iru eru verbs. They are the simplest and most basic kind of verb. When we want to make any change, we always do it the same way. All we do is take the ru off the end and put on whatever we want to put on. Ichidan verbs can only end with either iru or eru. That's to say, with one of the kana from the I row or one of the kana from the e row plus ru. The second group of verbs is by far the largest, and any ending that a verb can have, verbs in this group can have. Verbs always end with the u sound, but not all. U kana can make the end of a verb, but a lot of them can, and all of them can make godan verbs. They are called godan verbs, or 5-level verbs, for reasons that we'll see shortly. And as I say, they can end in any u sound, including iru or eru. Unlike ichidan verbs, they can also end in oru, aru, or uru. So the only time we have any ambiguity is when we have a verb ending in iru or eru. Most of those verbs are ichidan verbs, but there is a substantial minority of iru, eru ending godan verbs. It's not as difficult to differentiate them as you might think, and I've made a video on that, although it's a little bit more advanced than this lesson. The third group of verbs is irregular verbs, and the good news here is that there are only 2 of them. You know those pages and pages of irregular verbs in your Spanish or French textbook? Well, Japanese has just 2. There are a couple of other verbs that are irregular in just one small respect, but very few. The irregular verbs are kuru, come, and suru, do. So now that we know the 3 groups, we're going to take a look at how you make them into the te and ta form. As I explained last week, we need those 2 forms for making the Japanese present and past tenses, and they have a number of other uses too, which we'll learn as we go along with this course. And as I demonstrated last week, ichidan verbs are always very easy. You never do anything except take off the ru and put on whatever you're going to put on, in this case a te or a ta. As for the godan verbs, they fall into 5 groups, as you would expect, godan, 5-level verbs, and I made a video about this a while ago. So what I'm going to do is run that video right now, because I think it explains things pretty clearly. Alright, roll the video. Godan verbs have 5 kinds of possible ending. That's why they're called godan verbs, 5-level verbs. And although that seems a little bit difficult, it really isn't. We can combine 2 of the levels anyway, because they are so close that we only need to learn them once. And I'm going to go through the main groups. The first group is what I call the utsuru verbs. Those are the verbs ending in u, tsu, and ru. The word utsuru in Japanese, if you don't know it, now is a good time to learn it. Utsuru means to move from one thing to another, and that's exactly what we're doing here, moving our verbs from one type to another. So the verbs which end in u, tsu, and ru all transform in the same way to the te form. We take off the u, the tsu, or the ru, and we replace it with a small tsu plus te, or ta in the ta form. So, warau, laugh, becomes waratte. Motsu, hold, becomes motte. Toru, take, becomes totte. Now, you'll notice that utsuru has tsu in the middle, and the te form of the utsuru verbs is formed by using a small tsu plus that te. It's the only group that has tsu in it, and it's the only group that has a tsu in the te form ending. So it's really easy to remember. The second group is what I call the new boom group. In Japanese, when something is really taking off, when it's becoming popular, we call it a boomer. Boomer. That's an English word, isn't it? Boomer. A new boomer. So, this group I call the new boomer group because there isn't a Japanese word that you can make out of nu, bu, and mu that I know of. And what I want you to notice about this group of verbs is that they all end in what I will call a dull sound. M, b. It's not a sharp sound like s, ts, g, and it's not a neutral sound like r or It's a dull sound. N, b, m. And this is important because the ending is also a dull sound. The te form ending is n, de, the ta form is n, ta. So, shinu, the only nu ending verb, becomes shinde, shinda. Nomu, drink, becomes nonde, nonda. Asobu, play, becomes asonde, asonda. So that's the nubumu group, the dull ending verbs. And because only a limited number of the possible kana can be used as a verb ending, they include all the dull sounds except for gu. And we'll come to that right now. I told you that two of the groups were combined, and that is the ku and gu group. To make the te form of a ku ending verb, we cut off the ku and add ite or ita in the ta form. So aruku, walk, becomes aruite, aruita. Now, if we have a ten on that ku to make it into a gu, it's exactly the same, except that there is also a ten on the te ending. So aruku becomes aruite. But oyogu, to swim, becomes oyoide. But as you see, the two are more or less identical. It's just that if there's a ten on the original verb, there's a ten on the te form too. Aruku, aruite, oyogu, oyoide. And now we just have one left, and that is su. And verbs ending in su, drop the su, and add shite. As you will notice, if you have followed our last lesson, we are just doing that regular thing of shifting the su kana to its ro equivalent shi. So hanasu, talk, becomes hanashite. The masu, helper verb, which turns verbs into formal verbs in the past tense, becomes mashta. So there we have all the go-down verbs. Didn't I look young in that old video? Now we're just going to look at the exceptions. There are only 3 altogether, our 2 irregular verbs and 1 other small one. And these are very simple. Kuru, come, becomes kite. Suru, do, becomes shite. And iku, the verb iku, to go. Because it ends in ku, you would expect it to become ite, but it doesn't, it becomes itte. And those are the only exceptions. So if you go over the video a couple of times, I think you'll find it pretty easy to know exactly how to make the te and ta forms in all cases. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments below. And I'd like to thank my gold konnichiwa. Today, we're going to talk about adjectives. Now, Japanese adjectives are not the same thing as English adjectives. As we know, Japanese sentences come in 3 fundamental kinds, depending on the kind of engine they have. We have the U-train, verb sentences, the Da-train, noun sentences, and the E-train, which is the so-called adjectival sentences. But the truth is that any one of the 3 kinds of engine can be used like an adjective. So let's start off with the most obvious one, the one that's called adjective in English. A simple E-train sentence is pen ga akai. As you know, akai doesn't mean red, it means is red. Now, we can
Kita dapat mengubah mesin hitam ini.
black engine white and put it behind the pen. Now we have akai pen ga. Akai pen means is red pen, or as we say in English, red pen. As you see, this isn't a full sentence in itself anymore, because a white engine doesn't pull the train. It just tells us more about whatever it is sitting behind. So akai, once it becomes a white engine, is just telling us more about the main car of the sentence, which is pen. And if we want to make it into a full sentence, we have to have a new engine. So let's take chisai, which means still small. Akai pen ga chisai. The red pen is small. So that's simple enough. Now let's look at verbs. Now if you're worrying about na adjectives as they're called, don't worry. They are nouns and we'll get to them in a minute. Any engine, any verb in any tense can be used like an adjective. So we can say shoujo ga utatta. Utatta means sang. The word for sing is utau. So the ta form, as we know from our last lesson, is utatta. Shoujo ga utatta. The girl sang. And if we turn that engine white and put it behind the girl, we have utatta shoujo, the girl who sang. And of course, once again, this isn't a sentence, but we can put it into any sentence we like, such as utatta shoujo ga neteru. The girl who sang is sleeping. And this is terribly important because a lot of Japanese is structured this way. We can use entire verb sentences as adjectival if we want to, and this happens very often. For example, inu ga jisho wo tabeta. The dog ate the dictionary. We can turn this around to jisho wo tabeta inu, the dog who ate the dictionary. Or we can say inu ga tabeta jisho, the dictionary that was eaten by the dog. And then this can build into a full sentence. Jisho o tabeta inu ga yancha da. Yancha is a noun that means naughty or bad. So the dog who ate the dictionary is bad. This brings us to the noun engine. If we just say inu ga yancha da, we have a simple noun sentence. But we can turn this engine as well into a white engine and put it behind the dog. But there's one change we have to make. When we turn da or des into a white engine, when we connect it to anything, it changes its form from da to na. So we say inu ga yancha da, but we say yancha na inu, which is the same as saying yancha da inu, is bad dog. The dog that is bad, the bad dog. So we can say yancha na inu ga neteru. The bad dog is sleeping. Now the important thing to note here is that you can't do this with every noun. There are only some nouns that are frequently used in an adjectival way that you can use in the way we showed here. These are what the textbooks call na adjectives, and it's a slightly confusing term because, as we see, they are in fact nouns. But they are a certain class of noun. Can we use other nouns as adjectives? Yes, we can. But we use them in a somewhat different way, and they aren't engines. To explain this, we have to introduce a new type of car for our train, and this is the no car. No is a very simple particle because it works exactly like apostrophe S in English. So, sakura no doresu means Sakura's dress. Watashi no hana means my nose. Luckily, we don't have to worry about things like my and your and her and his in Japanese. We always just use no. Now, because no is the possessive particle, it can be used in another slightly different way. At the beginning of my older videos, I always used to say, Kawajappa no kyodori desu. I am Kawajappa's kyodori. In other words, Kawajappa is the group or party or website that I belong to. And we can use this more widely for defining the group or class to which anything belongs. So akai means it's red because we can turn the noun aka into the adjectival form akai, but we can't do that with all colors. For example, pinku iro iro means color, and we say pinku iro, that means pink. But that doesn't have an I form, and it doesn't count as an adjectival noun, a na adjective as they're called in English either. So what we do with it is we use no. Pinku iro no doresu, pink dress. And this means dress belonging to the class of pink things. If we want to say Oscar the rabbit, we say usagi no Oscaru, which literally means rabbit's Oscar. And what it means is Oscar who belongs to the class rabbit. Zelda no densetsu means the legend of Zelda. Densetsu no senshi means legendary warrior. Warrior who belongs to the class of legendary things. So we have 4 ways of forming adjectivals. The 3 engines plus the no car. And using this we can make all kinds of sentences, and they can become very complex, especially with verbal adjectives in which we can use whole complex sentences in an adjectival manner. And I'm going to do some worksheets that will help us to get used to some of those more complex sentences, and I'll put them in the information section below this video lesson. Now, one thing you may be thinking is, since some nouns are used as adjectives with na and some with no, do I have to start learning lists of which ones go with no and which ones go with na? And my answer to that is, I don't see any good reason to do so unless you're having to learn them for an exam. Why not? Well, look at it logically. If you hear someone use them with either no or na, you're going to know what they're saying. If you use them yourself and you get it wrong, nobody is going to have any difficulty. Today, we're going to talk about negatives. And in order to do that, we're going to have to introduce one of the fundamental secrets of Japanese that the schools and textbooks almost never tell you. And it makes the whole of Japanese much, much easier. But before we get to that, let's look at the fundamental basis of Japanese negatives. The fundamental basis of negatives is the adjective nai. This adjective means non-exist, not be. The word for exist, for any object, any inanimate thing, the sky, the sea, the universe, a grain of rice, a flower, a tree, anything, is aru. So, if we want to say there is a pen exists, we say pen ga aru. But if we want to say there isn't a pen, we say pen ga nai. Now, why do we use a verb for being and an adjective for non-being? Because this happens throughout Japanese. Whenever we do something, we use a verb. Whether we walk or sing or run or anything, that's a verb. But if we don't do it, then we attach nai to the verb, and that becomes the engine of the sentence. So when we say we're not doing something, we're not using a verb, we're using an adjective. Why is that? Because Japanese is very logical. When we do something, an action is taking place, that's a verb. But when we don't do it, no action is taking place, and we are describing a state of non-action. So that's an adjective. Alright, so if we want to say there is no pen, we say pen ga nai. But what if we want to say this is not a pen? That's not quite the same thing, is it? So how do we say that? If we want to say there is a pen, as we know, we say kore wa, kore desu, Kore wa pen da. As for this, pen equals. As for this, it's a pen. But if we want to say this is not a pen, we say kore wa pen de wa nai. So what does that mean? Well, the de is the te form of da or des. So we still have kore wa pen da in the form of kore wa pen de, and then we're attaching nai. So what we're saying is, as for this, as for being a pen, it isn't. This is not a pen. Alright, so now let's move on to the largest part of this question, which is verbs. In order to put a verb into the negative, we have to attach nai, and we do this by attaching it to the a stem. What does that mean? Well, let's look at the stem system. The Japanese verb stem system is the simplest, the most logical, and the most beautiful verb transformation system in this world. It's almost absolutely regular. Once you know how to do it, you can make any transformation except for the te and ta form, which you already know. But the schools and textbooks don't tell you this. Instead of telling you this, they present each conjugation, as they call it, and they aren't in fact conjugations. They present each one as a separate case with separate rules, which appear to be random. And because they don't tell you the fundamental logic of the whole system, and because they describe the changes that take place as if they were really written in the Roman alphabet when they are written in kana, it really looks like that. Students really think they have to treat each case as a separate case and learn separate rules in every case. And you don't have to. You just have to know the stem system. So let's look at it. As we've already learned, every verb ends in one of the uro kana. And I'm turning the chart on its side here for reasons you'll see in a moment. So these kana in the red box are the ones that can end a verb. It's not every uro kana, but it's most of them. So we have verbs like kau, buy, kiku, hear, hanasu, speak, motsu, hold, etc. Now, as you can see, there are 4 other possible ways in which a verb could end. And each of those 4 ways is used, and they are called the verb stems. Today, we're only going to look at the a stem, because that's the one we need for the negative. So to form the a stem, we simply shift the last kana of the verb from the u row to the a row. So kiku hear becomes kikka. Hanasu speak becomes hanasa. Motsu hold becomes motta, and so forth. There's only one exception in this system, and when I say that, I mean the whole system, all the stems. There's only this one exception, which is that when a word ends in the u kana, the stem doesn't change to a, it changes to wa. So the negative or kao is not ka nai, it's kawa nai. And it's only in the a stem that we have this exception, so that's the only exception in the whole system, and I think you can see why it exists. Ka nai is not as easy to say as kawa nai, is it? All the others are perfectly regular, and kiku here becomes kikanai, not here. Hanasu, speak, becomes hanasanai, not speak. Motsu, hold, becomes motanai, not hold, and so forth. And as we already know, with ichidan verbs, they only ever drop that ru and put on whatever we want to put on. So taberu, eat, becomes tabenai, not eat. And that's it. That's how we turn any verb negative. It's very, very simple. Now what about adjectives? How do we make adjectives negative? Well, when we make a transformation to an adjective, what we always do is we turn the i on the end of it into ku. Akai is red, becomes akaku. Kawaii is cute, becomes kawaiiku. Kawaii is scary, becomes kawaku. And this is the way we make the te form of adjectives. Aku becomes akaku te, and it's also the way we make the negative. Akai becomes akaku nai, not red. Now, interestingly, this ku is the opposite red. The negative, aku becomes akaku te, and it's also the way we make the negative. Akai becomes akaku nai, not red. Now, interestingly, this ku is the opposite of what happens in the te form, isn't it? If a word ends in ku in the te form, we turn that ku into e. But in an adjective, we turn the e into ku. If we want to put an adjective into the past tense, we take off the e and use katta. So, kowai is scary, becomes kowakatta, was scary. And because nai is also an e adjective, when we put that into the past, we also say nakatta. So, if we want to say Sakura runs, we say Sakura ga hashiru. If we want to say Sakura doesn't run, we say Sakura ga hashiranai. If we want to say Sakura ran in the past, we say Sakura ga hashitta, because it's a godan verb. And if we want to say Sakura didn't run in the past, we say Sakura ga hashiranakatta, hashiranai, and then we put nai into the past, hashiranakatta. Now, as we all know, Sakura ran hashiru is rather unnatural Japanese, just as it's rather unnatural English. We say Sakura is running in English, and in Japanese we say Sakura ga hashite iru. So if we want to put all that in the past, what do we do? Well, all we have to do is put that iru into the past. So we say Sakura ga hashite ita. Sakura was running, and if we want to say Sakura wasn't running, we say Sakura ga hashite inakatta. That iru is a simple ichidan verb, so we just drop the ru and put on ta or nai, and in the past, nakatta. I always say that Japanese is like Lego. Once you know the basic building blocks, you can build anything, and there are almost no exceptions in Japanese. In the whole of what we've been talking about today, there are really just two exceptions, and I'm going to introduce those so that you know everything you need to know. The only real exception to every verb being made negative by adding nai is the verb masu, which is a helper verb which makes words formal. We add it to the e stem of a verb, and we will look at the e stem later, but I think you can already guess what it is. So hanasu becomes hanashimasu, kiku becomes kikimasu, and so on. When you put masu into the negative, it does not become masanai, as you would expect. It becomes masen. Because it's formal, it's a bit old-fashioned, and it uses the old Japanese negative sen instead of nai. The only other apparent exception is that e, the adjective e, which means good, has an older form, yoi, which is still used quite often. And when we make any transformation to e, it turns back to yoi. So in the past tense, we don't say ikatta, we say yokatta. And if you've seen much anime, you've probably heard this quite often. Yokatta. Literally, zero ga yokatta, it was good. That turned out well, that's great. And if you want to say something is not good, you don't say ikunai, you say yokunai. And those are the only exceptions. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments. Hello, pretty peoples. Kawajapa no Kyodori desu. I am Kyodori from Kawajapa. Today we are going to talk about Japanese conjugation. Which particular conjugation, you may ask? Well, all of them, except for the ta and te form, which we will discuss in a different video. Why are we dealing with them all at once? Because we can. Because Japanese conjugation all works the same way. It's very simple, very logical, and very consistent, and very, very easy to understand. However, when we look in a textbook, we get the impression of lots of different rules and forms that you have to learn for each particular conjugation. Why is that? Why do the textbooks make it seem so complicated when it's actually so very simple? Two reasons. The first is that they insist on this European concept of conjugation. Actually, what we're doing is not conjugation at all. What we're doing all the time is attaching a simple helper verb or helper adjective or helper noun to the stems of the verb. And once we see how that works, it becomes very, very simple and easy to understand. The other problem is that they spend a lot of time explaining the changes that take place in terms of the Roman sound system, the alphabet. But in fact, that causes a lot of confusion and difficulty. Once we see it in the terms it actually exists in, that is to say, the Japanese sound system, it all becomes very logical. I would say it is 100% consistent, logical, and simple, except that there is one exception in the whole system, and there are two irregular verbs, so perhaps we'd better say 99.9% logical, consistent, and easy to understand. Alright, so let's give you the master chart, which will show you how all of this works. Chart o kudasai. So, here is the familiar Japanese kana chart with all the sounds of Japanese. I'll turn it on its side for reasons which will become apparent shortly. All Japanese verbs end with one of the kana in the middle row. It looks like a column because I've turned it on its side. That is the u row, u, ku, su, tsu, nu, etc. However, there is no verb ending in u, so we can get rid of these two columns and simplify the chart. Actually, there is only one verb that ends in nu, that's shinu, to die. So we could get rid of that too and make it look even simpler, but I'm keeping it in for completeness. So, every verb ends with one of the kana in the red box. Let's have an example of each of the possible endings. Kau, buy, kiku, hear, hanasu, speak, motsu, hold, shinu, die, tobu, fly, nomu, drink, toru, take. Now, as you can see, there are four other possible endings that the verbs could have. And, in fact, each of those endings is used. And when we use one of the other endings, the verb stops being a verb and becomes what I call a sticky stem. That is, a stem to which we stick something else. So, here is the E stem. With the E sticky stem, we change the uro kana to the corresponding iro kana. So, kau becomes kai, kiku becomes kiki, hanasu becomes hanashi, and so forth. What do we do with the iro sticky stem? Well, the thing that you have all seen, I'm sure, is we can attach the helper verb masu to the iro sticky stem. Masu is not a conjugation, it is a verb. It's a helper verb, and it attaches to the iro sticky stem. It does not change the meaning of the verb, but it makes it formal. So, kau is the regular informal version, meaning buy. Kai masu is the formal version. Kiku is the informal version. Here, kiki masu is the formal version. What else do we do with the iro sticky stem? Well, we can attach the helper adjective tai. Tai is a helper adjective which means want. So, kai tai means want to buy. Kiki tai, want to hear. Hanashi tai, want to speak, and so forth. We also use the iro sticky stem for attaching nouns in order to convert a verb into a new noun. So, kai mono, that is buy thing, means shopping. Nomi mono, drink thing, means a drink. Hanashi kata, kata means form or shape. Hanashi kata means way of speaking, manner of speaking. So now we know how to attach all these except for what are called ru verbs, the ichiran verbs. And they are very, very, very simple because all you ever do with these ever is simply cut off the ru and you have all the possible sticky stems of the ichiran verb. So taberu simply becomes tabe. Tabemasu is the formal form of the verb. Tabetai, want to eat. Tabemono, eat thing, food. So now we come to the aro sticky stem. And this has one exception, and you say, language is full of exceptions. This is the only exception in the whole system, and it's a very natural one that you can well understand. The ending verb does not become ka-a, it becomes ka-wa, which is a lot easier to say and understand in conversation, isn't it? So, ka-u does not become ka-a nai, it becomes ka-wa nai. So, what do we use the a ending stem for? I've already mentioned it. Probably the most common use is to attach the helper adjective nai to the sticky stem of a verb. It attaches to the a sticky stem. So, kau, by, becomes kawa, nai, not by. Kiku becomes kika, nai, not here. Hanasu becomes hanasa, nai, not speak, and so forth. It's very simple. We also use the a sticky stem for the causative and the so-called passive forms of verbs, and these conjugations often give beginners quite a lot of trouble, and I have made videos that show how simple they really are, how they work, what they mean, and how simple it really is if you understand them the way they actually are. Today we're just going to look at the structure. So, the causative form of verb, which means to allow someone to do something or make someone do something, is formed by attaching the helper verb seru saseru to the aro sticky stem. Now I say seru saseru. What does that mean? Well, it means that there are actually two forms of this helper verb. Seru attaches to all those sticky stems that we're working with, all the ones that change, and saseru attaches to the ichidan, the so-called ru verb, sticky stem. Where there is a slight variation in the helper verb, we always find that the longer version goes on to the ichidan verb, because that verb is generally shorter. The ichidan verb, we take off the whole last syllable. With the godan verbs, the changing sticky stems, we don't take off the last syllable, we change it to a different sound. So, seru, saseru makes the causative form of a verb. Kau becomes kawa, seru, allow to buy, make to buy. Hanasu becomes hanasa, seru, allow to speak, make to speak. Nomu becomes noma, seru, allow to drink, make to drink, and taberu becomes tabe saseru, allow to eat, make to eat. The so-called passive, which is not really passive, and we have a video helping you with understanding what it really does and how simple that really is. The so-called passive, the receptive form, is formed with the helper verb reru, rareru. So, kau becomes kawareru, which means get bored, be bored, get bored. Get bored is better because that's closer to what the Japanese really means, and you'll understand that when you see the video. Kiku becomes kika, reru, get heard. Nomu becomes noma, reru, get drunk. I don't mean become intoxicated, I mean the way the cup of coffee got drunk. Taberu becomes taberareru, get eaten. So as you see, there are really, apart from that one exception, there are not lots and lots of different ways of attaching these together. It's because it's presented as a conjugation and because it's explained as if it was written in Roman letters that the confusion arises. We can see that it's actually very, very regular. We just shift to the aro and add the helper adjective nai, the helper verb reru, rareru, the helper verb seru, saseru, and it's just as simple as that. Now we come to the ero sticky stem, just like the others. It's perfectly consistent. You just change the ro kana into the corresponding ero kana. So kau becomes kae, kiku becomes kike, hanasu becomes hanase, and so forth. We use the ero sticky stem to create the potential form of verbs, which means you can do the verb. The helper verb, which is stuck onto the ero sticky stem, is ru, dareru, and yes, even though it's simply ru, just that one character, it is a helper verb. If you look it up in a Japanese dictionary, not a Japanese English dictionary, but a real Japanese dictionary, you'll find ru there as a joroshi, a helper verb, and it has these two forms, ru and rareru. Rareru is, you will have noticed, the same as the so-called passive, reru, rareru. So the ichiran form of the passive and the potential are the same, but because they are used very, very differently, there are very, very few occasions on which you would confuse the two, so it's not really a problem. So we have kaeru, kanmai, kikeru, can hear, hanaseru, can speak, and so forth, plus taberareru, can eat. So, now we come to the last sticky stem, the O sticky stem, and just as with the others, it's perfectly consistent. Kau becomes kao, kiku becomes kiko, hanasu becomes hanaso, and what we do with this sticky stem is attach u, and as you know, u, when attached to o, generally lengthens the o. So kao doesn't become kau, it becomes kao. Kiku becomes kiko, hanasu becomes hanaso, and the volitional has a number of uses, and I'm only talking about structure here, so I'll just use one of the uses. Kao becomes kao, let's buy, kiku becomes kiko, let's listen, let's hear. Hanasu becomes hanaso, let's talk. In the ichiran form, we add yo to the end of the ichiran sticky stem. So, taberu becomes tabeyo. Let's eat. One peculiarity of the volitional form is that you can also make it by changing the form of masu to use the volitional in its formal mode. And when you do this, you say masho instead of masu. And when you do this naturally enough, you use the i-ro sticky stem just as you do with regular masu. So, ikimasho, let's go. So now you have the master keys to nearly the whole of the Japanese so-called conjugation system. And as you now know, it's not conjugation at all. The only thing we haven't covered is the ta and te forms of verbs, which perhaps are closer to being conjugations. And fortunately, ta and te work identically, so once you know one, you know the other, and we will cover that in a future video. You may not be able to swallow everything in this video in one gulp, but every time you become confused about the way any conjugation is working, please come back to this video and run it through, and I think it will all become perfectly clear. Some people will ask, well, what about irregular verbs? Remember all those pages and pages of irregular verbs in the back of the French textbook or the German textbook or the Spanish textbook? Well, yes, Japanese has irregular verbs too. There are two of them. That's right, just two. Suru and kuru. And they work a little bit differently from the others, and you'll very soon pick that up. Remember that the textbook for this course of lessons is Unlocking Japanese, and you can get it at Amazon in paperback or Kindle editions. Thank you.